let's now do a really quick review on statutes and codes. And back here on our handout Sources of the Law, if you understand this first row under legislative, at least through state, you will understand at least 50% of what you need to know regarding statutes and codes. So you will understand that a session law is essentially enacted by what's initially enacted by the legislature, signed by the executive. So that's the first stage of a law, and those session laws are organized chronologically. They're called public laws for federal laws. They're called chapter laws here in New York. The federal laws, you find public laws and statutes at large USCAN. State chapter, at least New York chapter laws, we find in McKinney's session laws. And then, of course, the force gets applied to our session laws, so there is a way for us to find the laws by subject and those laws that are currently in force. We don't want to know what law that was repealed 15 years ago is. We want to know what the law is today. And we find that for the federal realm in the U.S. Code, also in the U.S. Code annotated in U.S. Code Services, the annotated codes which are our BFFs. And in New York, we find them in McKinney's as well as CLS, Consolidated Law Service. A good illustration to understand the differences between session laws and public law section numbers, and now we're talking about federal law statutes because we're talking about public laws. So a good way to understand the difference between public laws and the U.S. Code is one of our very useful tools, what I call the Table 3 translation tool. And here on the U.S. House site, if we go to this other tables, we see our Table 3 tool. And if we have our public law number, so if we remember that ERISA is 93406, and again, you need the public law number to use this tool, we see the difference between the public law section number. So here's 93406. Here's section, I'm just using 4, and we see that section 4 winds up to be section 1003 in Title 29 of the U.S. Code. So the point of this is just to remember that public law section numbers are different than where they wind up in the U.S. Code in terms of section numbers. Also useful at this U.S. Code site is the popular name tool. And this helps us to find those public laws if we have the name instead of the public law number. So if we know ERISA, or Employee Retirement Income Security Act, then we can find the public law number and at least the beginning of where it is in the U.S. Code using the popular name tool. We see this from the other side if we take a look at our code sections. So here's 29 U.S.C. 1144. And if I go to the history on Lexis, remember it's called Credits on Westlaw, I see the history of this section. So again, I see this was originally enacted by Public Law 93406 in 1974. It was Section 514 of PL 93-406. Then I see and amended by Public Law 97-473 in 1983, and so forth, until finally the last time that our section was amended was in 2006 by Public Law 109-280. And I can see up top here on Lexis that Lexis has updated all of the U.S. Code as of 12/21/2018. Similarly on Westlaw, Westlaw will tell us how current the entire code is with the currentness link. So we see there down here at the bottom, it tells us current through 29 chapters 1 through 10, and it in the credits, which is the same as history on Lexis, it will tell us the history of our section. Now we're actually looking at 4410 in the New York Code, just to show you again that state codes work pretty much the same as the U.S. Code, as the federal code. So our credits tell us when our section was first enacted, as well as the different times that it was amended. In terms of finding the relevant code sections for your issue, we've already talked about the popular name table. That is when you already have the name of your particular act. That's going to be fairly unusual. Far more frequently, you're going to just know your issue, and then you're going to want to do a keyword search, and of course start in secondary sources. But as I mentioned, secondary sources may only cover one aspect of your issue, if at all. So you'll want to try other methods as well. Those other methods could include looking in the index. That other method can just include doing a keyword search and looking at the statutory codes themselves. Just remember about the concept of the controlled vocabulary. So that keyword search, you may want to be a little more precise and use some of the terms and connectors like /p and /s that we've discussed. Also remember, however you do your research in whatever code, whatever section you look at, make sure to look at the statutory context or statutory scheme. And you find that in this heading information in whatever code you are looking at. So you want to make sure that you are in the right subject area. So labor, employee retirement income security, that tells me we are in ERISA and I am in the right area. Now I may want to drill down further or not, as the case may be, but whatever I choose, and I can do it different ways at different times. I can take a look at any of these links so that I can look at the table of contents. And again, whatever you wind up finding in your secondary search research, in your index, in your keyword search, take a look at the table of contents around the sections that you get once you determine that you are in fact in the correct statutory context, because you will then frequently find other sections that are of interest. Make sure to check for the definition sections. Make sure that there aren't other sections that are equally, if not more relevant. Sometimes your keyword search or secondary search will give you a statutory code section that's not great, and by looking in the table of contents, you'll find the one that's even better. So perhaps civil enforcement is even more relevant for us than the 1144 other laws. And this works just the same with state codes. If we go back up to the top, you want to make sure that you are in the right statutory context. Again, this is probably more important for the state codes, just because you can find your key terms in many, many different titles and contexts. So you want to make sure that you're in the right title or subject area, public health law, and that, again, you are in the subject area, statutory context, statutory scheme, whatever term you want to think of it as. Make sure that that is the correct issue, that your issue falls within what you're looking at, or more importantly, what you're looking at falls within your issue. If not, then that is not the right statute section for you. And again, you can get to the table of contents by clicking on any of those links to, again, look for other sections that might be relevant to you. And as we have discussed many times, the annotated code is your BFF. So taking a look at the annotated code, look for the notes of decisions or citing references. Lexis and Westlaw has these both. Bloomberg calls it Smart Code. They've done part of the research for you. They have found cases that either interpret or cite to your code section. So take advantage of the resources. Also, if you need more explanation, a lot of times you'll get a reference to a code section, you'll read it and really just not understand what it's telling you or how it applies to your issue. Take a look at the context and analysis for that code section to get some background on that particular section. We've also talked about using citators, so there's citing references here on Westlaw, taking a look for whatever flags there might be. On Lexis, we took a look at Shepard's, so I'll go back here to one of our sections so you can see that again. So here on Lexis Shepard's, if we click on Shepardize, Lexis will tell us how the cases treat our code section. We can look here in the analysis for that, and Lexis also provides us with the opportunity to see what cases cite to particular subsections. So if we're only interested in subsection D of 1144, Lexis will point us to cases that cite to just subsection D, if there are any, of course. And finally, a few things to remember about statutes and codes. First, we've been talking a lot about preemption because that's the issue for our client, or at least one of the issues as it applies to ERISA. But preemption is actually a concept that applies across many areas of federal law. So if you are dealing with an area that has both state and federal law, you want to think about whether the issue of preemption is relevant. Remember that statutes are authority only in the jurisdiction in which you're in. So we only worry about New York statutes here in New York. We don't worry about Florida, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, or any other state. And likewise, those states don't worry about New York. We may have to worry about federal statutes if we're talking about a federal issue, but other than that, we only worry about our state issue, our state statutes, and the federal statutes. They don't have persuasive value the way cases might, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about cases. States will sometimes look to uniform laws on how to draft their own statutes, but the uniform law itself is not considered persuasive unless, of course, the state adopted it. Finally, a lot of you ask, and it's an absolutely excellent question, what's my search strategy? Where do I start? Well, if you know that your issue is covered by statutes, then you'll still probably want to start in secondary sources to get, again, a background for that. If you already have a statute section, you could start there and look at the secondary sources in your annotated code that's referenced there about your section. You really don't want to start in cases, because cases are going to be very, very particular applications of the statute, and unless it's exactly the same as your client and still good law, which is going to be a very, very unusual situation, cases will not be the best place to start. You definitely want to look there, but I would say not as your first step. You do want to do a separate search in statutes in addition to secondary sources, or maybe the index, again, to make sure that you've covered all the different aspects of your issue. That is all for statutes and codes.